Привет! Данный курс скачан с сайта SuperSliv.biz. На сайт ежедневно добавляются топовые материалы от крутых авторов и лучших онлайн-школ. Если вы житель России, то на сайт можно попасть, если включить VPN. Если все же вы не знаете, что такое VPN, или не хотите его использовать в работе, то на сайт можно попасть через актуальную ссылку. Она находится по адресу supersliv.co. Итак, резюмируем. Жителям России обязательно включать VPN для доступа к supersliv.biz. А те, кто не умеет или не знает, что такое VPN, используйте актуальное зеркало supersliv.co. Заходите на сайт удобным для вас способом и получайте крутой контент ежедневно.
Let's talk about hardware requirements if you want to run local AI models, LLMs and diffusion models. And I have made some slides here. So let's just take a look. The hardware basics that are important for LLMs and diffusion. The most important thing, at least how I see it, is your GPU. This means you need a lot of VRAM. This is crucial for speed and model size. If you have more GPU, if you have more VRAM, you can run larger and larger models and they will run faster and faster. The next thing is also RAM. It's important for data, indexes and also for RAG. Especially if you build like local RAG solutions, your RAM are also important. Then of course you need a lot of storage, because these models can take up some space on your machine. Some of these models are really large, some of them are a bit smaller. The next important thing is also your CPU. It's a bit less crucial, but it's still useful for pre- and post-processing. If you want to run, for example, a diffusion model, like with ConfUI, you will learn all of this. ConfUI needs to suck these models in your VRAM, and before it gets complete GPU offload, your CPU needs to do a little bit of work. And of course also cooling and power is important, because if you have continuous operation, you will have high power draw. So your machine can get a little bit hot, you should have a little bit of cooling. I just want to give you some recommendations for hardware, so what you can have, what you should have. These are just rough estimates. You should have a bit of VRAM. I do think that between 6 and 12 GB is okay for small models. If you only have 6, you are a bit restricted. If you have 12, you can run most of the things. If you want to have completely optimal hardware, 24 to 48 GB of VRAM would be enormous. If you have, for example, an H100 from NVIDIA, this would be the non-plus-ultra. I don't think that this is realistic. Most of the people will never ever have this graphic card. Something that is more like a consumer-grade hardware is a RTX 4090 or a 5090. These are the graphic cards that a lot of gamers have, and they work exceptionally well for local AI. But like I told you, you don't need to go like until 24 or 48 GB. Also 6 to 12 is fine. If we talk about diffusion models, basically the same thing is true. A minimum of 6 GB is fine to run the smaller models like a Stable Diffusion 1.5, also Stable Diffusion XL, or even small flux models if they are quantized. We will talk about quantization a bit later, so that you don't get overwhelmed. But also here in an optimal world, you would have, for example, 24 GB of VRAM or even 48 like with these LLMs. If you want to run, for example, large flux models or maybe also video models like the WAN models from Qwen, if you have a lot of VRAM, you will have a lot of fun. And also here you need a little bit of storage. 1 to 2 terabyte would be, of course, really great, because, yeah, these models, they can take up some space. If you have a lot of models in ConfUI, they will take a lot of space. As a rule of thumb, the more VRAM you have, the larger models you can run on your machine, and the better these models will perform, and they will also be faster. If you have more RAM, these models will simply run more stable, and you can do multitasking. You can do RAG, you can do databases, you don't have to close like every window on your machine, you can simply do a little bit of multitasking. If you have NVMe instead of HDD, these models will load a bit faster. What's also important is that one strong GPU is a lot nicer to have than multiple weak GPUs. So don't try to string like 5 3050s together. It's better to have one bigger GPU. And don't underestimate power consumption and noise. If you like run these models all day long, Yeah, it can be a little bit louder because your computer needs to do a bit of cooling. If we want to dive a tiny bit deeper, let's just talk about GPUs, so graphic processing units first, your graphic card. I do think that the NVIDIA GPUs are best suited because NVIDIA has CUDA, and with CUDA all of these models will run a bit nicer and they are also easier to run. If you have AMD graphic cards where CUDA is not included, these models can be a little bit slower and maybe also a little bit harder to set up. GPUs that are recommended are, for example, a RTX 3090, a 4090 or a 5090, because they have a lot of VRAM. They have most of the time between 16 to 24 gigabytes of VRAM. If you have a 4060, for example, like I have, this is also fine. But then you're a bit restricted, you need to use some quantized models, but also with a 4060 you are fine. If you go to the high end, with a H100 that has between 40 and 80 GB of VRAM, of course this would be the non plus ultra, but I don't think that somebody from this course will have this, unless you're working in a company and you have your own servers, then you have most likely a H100. And like I told you, some smaller models they can run on 6 to 12 GB VRAM, no problem. If we talk about CPU, so your processor, a powerful multi-core GPU is important since it handles many tasks alongside the GPU. Here are some recommendations. I do think that Intel and AMD do a great job here. And if you want to have top performance, also this is a CPU that works exceptionally well. Most of the people will have most likely something like this. Then if we talk about RAM, so the memory, we can simply say more is better. A minimum of 32 gigabytes is fine, then you can work okay. If you have 16 gigabyte, this is also fine, but 32 is preferred, and ideal would be 64 GB of memory, especially if you want to run larger models. If we talk about storage, so your hard drives, it should be fast and you need to have sufficient storage. This is all. If you have 1 TB of storage, I do think you are fine. If you go up to 2, it's even better. Then the software environment, the operating system on its own is not that important. Linux or Ubuntu is often preferred for machine learning support, but Windows works too. If you have a Mac, also no problem. Mac has, by the way, most of the time this unified memory, so you don't have a separate GPU, but this unified memory is also nice, especially if you want to work with LLMs. With diffusion models you are a bit restricted. From time to time we talk about Apple in the next video. CUDA, of course, is really great. If you have an NVIDIA graphic card with CUDA, you will have a lot of fun. Most of the time we also need things like Python, this is a programming language, or frameworks like PyTorch and TensorFlow. This is always model dependent, but I have to tell you, you don't need to worry about Python or PyTorch and so on in this course, because we work most of the time with Ollama. Ollama does the heavy lifting for you. And we work with Confi, also Confi does the heavy lifting for you. You don't need to work like with Python and PyTorch a lot. If you simply install these programs, everything will come back on your machine and you don't have to worry about it. And if we talk about cooling and power supply, just have something that your computer doesn't run hot. Then you are fine. If you have no clue what hardware you have, I want to give you a quick tip. You can download this software. On the webpage Tech Power Up, you can search GPU Z. And you can also search for Tech Power Up GPU Z. If you simply download this by pressing on this button, something like this will open on your machine. Moment, I will show you this. These two things will be on your desktop after the installation, and then you can open this up, for example, and this shows you exactly what hardware you have. I have, for example, a NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4060. Here you get all the details from this hardware. But the most important thing is down here the memory size. You see, I have roughly 8 GB of VRAM. And with this graphic card I can run like most of the models. Of course I need to use some quantization, but this is completely fine. You get of course a lot more details here, but the most important thing is this number right here. If we talk about the CPU, you can also open this up. And you also get here all the information. You see, for example, that I do have an Intel Core i7 and you get all the infos right here. You can also simply up the task manager. If you open up the task manager, something like this will pop up. And here you will find basically your GPU and CPU power. This right here is in German for me, but I do think this will be English for you, so simply take a look. You see that I have 16 GB of RAM, and down here on the GPU, my 8 GB of VRAM. And that's basically everything that you need to know about your hardware. Of course, if you work with an Apple PC or with a Mac or something like this, I will see you in the next video because here it's a little bit different. But as a rule of thumb, if you have 6 to 8 GB of VRAM, you can work in this course completely fine. And if your RAM have like 16 GB, you are also fine. The easiest thing is simply to test all of this out, because the newer models, they get always more efficient. They work with something that is called mixture of experts. You just have to suck a tiny bit of the model in your GPU, for example. You just do a tiny bit of GPU offload and these models will work. The easiest thing is later, as soon as we are in Olama or Confi, to simply try this model out and see how fast it performs in your machine. Even if your graphic card is not included in this lecture, or even if you have less, I would strongly recommend you to try these things out as soon as we download these models, because then we talk about quantization and you will find exactly the model that runs on your specific hardware. And I'll see you in the next video where we talk about the Apple hardware.
Привет! Данный курс скачан с сайта SuperSliv.biz. На сайт ежедневно добавляются топовые материалы от крутых авторов и лучших онлайн-школ. Если вы житель России, то на сайт можно попасть, если включить VPN. Если все же вы не знаете, что такое VPN, или не хотите его использовать в работе, то на сайт можно попасть через актуальную ссылку. Она находится по адресу SuperSliv.co. Итак, резюмируем. Жителям России обязательно включать VPN для доступа к SuperSliv.biz. А те, кто не умеет или не знает, что такое VPN, используйте актуальное зеркало SuperSliv.co. Заходите на сайт удобным для вас способом и получайте крутой контент ежедневно.